So here we are at Picnic Point. So you can see on the map we're near Mathaura. We're pretty close to where the Murray River reaches the edge of the Cadell Tilt and where it initially was forced north around the blockage and then later moved south. So here it is moving westwards and then now south. So what we're going to look at here is why are the banks and the landscapes so different here than they are from Barmah on and down to Echuca. So if we just walk over to the river now, the obvious difference is the height of the banks. Even though we've got low river here, and you can tell that by where the erosion reaches to and where the watermarks on the vegetation and the trees and the bank is only about a metre above, at the most, above the water. In Echuca it is 8 to 10 metres below. So there's something going on, and our job is to think about what that might be. So let's have a bit of a look. If we look around here and across here, you can see a slight rise next to the river. Now that's a natural levee. Behind me, that has been dozed up to be a man-made levee to protect land. But this bit here is actually the natural levee, and that's where when water comes up in flood and flows across here, it drops the sediment before it moves on. So the highest point in this landscape is actually the levee on both sides. So if you look across the other side, you can actually see the forest dropping away after you pass the riverbank. Now that same process is happening down at Echuca, but the river is much closer here. So the reason for that is that this is a depositional environment. The river here is depositing soil, depositing all the sediment that it is carrying as it is being slowed down by the blockage of the Cadell Tilt. Now you might say, but hang on a sec, the water is flowing quite quickly here. If you look at that duck, it's having to work pretty hard. Go duck. Anyway, you'll also know that the Narrows are known for being fast. And the thing is that the river landscape is not defined by its normal levels. It's actually defined by what happens during flood. And during flood time, the water comes pretty close to stopping here. In fact, when I came down here in 2016 in the flood, from Picnic Point onwards, there was no flow whatsoever in the river. It just stopped. All the flow was leaving, any flow there was leaving and flowing over these banks and into the forest. In doing so, it was depositing the sediment it was carrying. Once you get down to Echuca, it's quite a different story. Actually, once you pass Barmah, that is the edge of the Cadell Tilt, and suddenly you reach a point where the river is cutting through that high ground, cutting around the edge of the uplift, eroding its way around that uplifted ground until it finally finds its way back into its old riverbed, which is round about, well, just after Swan Hill, actually at the Warcool Junction. This rock is quite interesting. This rock, with its memorial, with its plaque commemorating the Murray Marathon, is actually rock that was hardened from beach sand when the Cadell Tilt was uplifted. The heat of the earthquake, of the fragments of earth rubbing against each other, fused it into a solid rock. Not enough to get rid of the original grains, but that's what it is. The size of those particles actually tells you that in those times the weather was wetter and able to carry much larger grains than it does today. So your job in this location is to do a cross-sectional sketch of the river. So you should identify the natural features and the human features. Natural features should include the natural levee banks, as you can see to the left and the right of this image. It should include the river red gums, which in this location are about 35 meters tall, about that. On the left up here we've got reeds growing on the edge. We've got snags, so fallen trees, where the speedboat use, the waves from the speedboats, and also the erosion from the constant river height has caused those trees to fall in. So natural features, levee banks, river red gums on the river red gum forest, snags, reeds. Across this side they're not reeds, they're actually kumbungi. And of course here a boat ramp, a jetty, even a retaining wall. So in your cross section you need to have some elements of both. You also need to indicate which way you're looking. So if you're looking this way, for example, looking towards the sun, it's about midday, that makes this direction north. If you are looking this way, because cross section always has to be upstream or downstream, then you are looking south. So make sure you indicate that in your cross section. The next thing you need to do is put in some measurements. Your drawing needs to be realistic. Your geographers. So the banks are about 1 meter high. The main thing is you're trying to contrast what the banks are like in Echuca with what the banks are like here. The width of the river you can work out using Google Maps and the ruler tool, and then you can tell me whether it's actually wider or narrower here than in Echuca. Now there's two ways of measuring of seeing or understanding the width of the river. One is the width of the water, the river itself at normal level. Now this is pretty close to normal level, a bit lower, so we're missing say a couple of meters in width, but it's not much different. So given that it is carrying the same amount of water as it is in Echuca, it is not likely to be all that different, but you can check on that. The other way to measure it is by measuring the distance between the tops of the levees. Now here, the top of the levee is probably about 4 meters in from the bank on this side, and the top of the levee is probably where all that erosion is happening on the other side. So we're actually seeing the levee bank being eroded on that side. So the tops of the banks are quite close to the width of the river as measured by the levee banks. The natural levees is not much different to the width of the river itself. Now that's a concern, because if the forest is narrower, if the levees are breached here, those natural levees are all we've got stopping the river from flooding the forest. And that is why this 8-knot sign and this sign here saying no wakeboarding and wave enhancing activities is pointing that way. So we've got that same thing here, and of course it says penalties apply. there doesn't seem to be all that much notice taken of it. Certainly in the past you can see that it hasn't been happening. So if this erosion continues, the more that erosion happens, the less protection the forest has from the river. And because the water management authorities can't allow the forest to be flooded all the time, it means that the river can carry less and less water downstream without flooding the forest. So it becomes a significant water management issue, one that I would suggest is not yet resolved. So again, what you're doing here, you're identifying human and natural features. Natural features are the width of the river channel, so the wet bit, the width of the river channel as measured from natural levee to natural levee, the type of trees that are growing on either side, the vegetation along the bank, so in this case here the kambangi and the natural reeds. And then you might also measure how fast it is flowing. So the best way to do that is follow something floating like these leaves and then walk alongside it and see how quick you think that is. Now be aware that different parts of the river move at different speeds, so you might want to throw a stick in instead. Human features include things like this retaining wall or this embankment here, these stones that have been put in to break down the wash, barbecues, signs, boat ramp, landing, park, things like that. So have fun and good luck.